2012 is called to order. Welcome to everyone present and to our television viewers. This meeting is being televised live and will replay throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the board website for replay times. At this time, want to get started with public comment. Ms. Houston, is there anybody signed up for citizen comment?
Yes, we have one person, Scott Overton.
Good evening. I'm Scott Overton, Overton, and I just hello and thank you all for entertaining me tonight. I wanted to speak to you about the high school redesign and some things that have come, that you're going to be hearing about the high school later tonight, so that's why I wanted to bring this up. So, as a person who is highly invested in the high school redesign process, I wanted to highlight some points from those discussions in light of the report you will be receiving later. I am pleased to see the beginning of equalizing of student populations in our high schools and some amazing gains in terms of access to a full program and quality of offerings in our programs at Roosevelt and Jefferson. I also love to see the vibrancy of the actual students in these programs. Of special concern to me is the apparent disregard of the distributing of resources across the schools for students in need of academic priority. The high school program has taken a big overall hit from the idea that we had in the beginning of this all for a robust full day filled with challenge and support classes to one now that fulfills kind of a minimum expectation of meeting the required classes for graduation. And this is not any fault of yours, I understand. It's the reality of life. We hope that every academic priority student would get at least one, if not two, periods of extra support in the plan. But there's really no FTE given to support that. So a school needs to take from the general FTE to provide support at the expense of the rest of the school. When the numbers are small, it may seem insignificant, but I've been told that at Grant, for example, there are over 500 academic priority students enrolled, which does make the choice between support or regular classes a real one for the administration at Grant. Just to highlight the fact, with 500 academic priority students, giving them each one extra period is equal to about a 3 FTE. So it's a significant chunk into the work of the school. You'll hear that students are taking as many classes as they did when the 7-period schedule, and in some cases even more, but time in front of our skilled teachers is actually less, with someone having a 6.7 out of 7 periods being taught is about 95% of the day, and for that to be equal in an 8-period day, you would need to have 7.6 of 8 periods, just so that realize that time is different than classes. And only 2 freshman groups in 2 of the high schools actually are up to that 7.6 out of 8. So I ask you to remember our vision and not to make the high schools take the brunt of the cuts, especially if you're asking for improved graduation success in these same academic priority students. It really does matter in significant ways, and with real lives and averages have a tendency to hide this sort of disaggregated data. So just wanted to remind you of our vision of the high school redesign.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Only one person. So we're going to move on to an update on the Marysville, or the rebuilding of Marysville. So Superintendent Smith.
Jim Owens to come on up and give us the update, and this is really just giving us a progress report on the insurance rebuild at Marysville that sustained the fire. Jim.
Great. Thank you, Superintendent Smith, and good evening, School Board. I'm Jim Owens from the Office of School Modernization, and I'm joined tonight by Michelle Platter, Office of School Modernization Project Manager for the Marysville Insurance Rebuild Project. In your board packets is a short informational report that summarizes the status of the project. It's a short summary, and hopefully it provides an update on where we are in construction phase currently. We're pleased to report that we're on schedule to complete the planned improvements and will be ready to accommodate students and staff the first week of January. Following the devastating fire in 2009, staff and community developed a plan to fully rebuild Marysville integrating insurance proceeds with a proposed May 2011 capital construction bond. After the failure of the bond measure, we examined alternatives, including relocation to Kellogg versus returning to Marysville. In deciding to return, the project scope became limited to an insurance rebuild with some additional district funding to augment for seismic strengthening, exterior siding, improvements to media center, tech labs, and painting. The educational programs are enhanced in the damaged section only. New technology lab, science lab, and expanded library space. Unfortunately, we were unable to fully modernize the school. Approximately half of the interior will look basically unchanged from what it was previously. Before I turn over the presentation to Michelle for the status update, and we do have a short PowerPoint presentation to share with you, I'd like to pause and say thank you for the incredible leadership she's provided in planning, designing, and constructing the improvements. Ably assisted by Sarah Oakes, Assistant Project Manager, and Sarah is in the audience tonight. They've orchestrated a process with community, building level, and other district staff to maximize the benefits of the limited dollars that we had to work with, and both have worked tirelessly to ensure the highest quality. Although we're not done yet, these ladies inspire confidence, and I know their efforts, along with those of the project team, will result in an improved school for PPS students and staff. Michelle will provide further details to describe how the improvements will enhance the physical learning environment when the students return. Michelle?
Thanks, Jim. And thanks, everybody, for letting us come and make this presentation this evening. One of the things I wanted to say is that part of this process where we really had a community engagement, we also had an internal stakeholders engagement, and we had the opportunity to work with the teaching staff, the custodial staff, the grounds people, and the trade shops within Portland Public Schools to really look at what we could do with the limited dollars we had and try to make improvements that'll not just last for the students in a teaching environment, but also in ways that will help us with our maintenance and help with things moving forward in the school project. The work status right now is 75% complete. We've gotten to a point in the project where there are no outstanding unresolved issues, which is wonderful. We're running for the finish now. And some of the features that we've really looked at in putting into the school, we have been able to put in a wireless system throughout the school. So even in spaces where we weren't necessarily able to upgrade the data cables and things like that, at least we have wireless so that we can get students to be able to use iPads and things like that and have the communication that we need within our facilities. As we've talked about before, we have a fire alarm system and fire sprinkler system that's going in throughout the school, which is a wonderful improvement to the facility. We were actually able, through Fund 405, to do some measure of seismic improvements even to the unburned portion of the school, and so that's been a real benefit to us. And then we've actually done some additional asbestos abatement in the crawl spaces of the facility, even in the unburned portion, which will help with our custodial staff and our maintenance staff for going under the floors when they're working on different things to be able to go in and not have the worry of asbestos in those areas. When we talk about the teaching and learning, when we look at the new science classroom that we're going to have, we are putting in new sinks, and so we have the sinks, we have power, again we have the wireless and some additional data cables. We have a teaching station that is going to be provided so that the teacher actually has a workstation and can show the students how experiments are being done, and then they'll be able to use the facility there to perform the experiments rather than just sitting at desks and learning from books. Within the media center, we've really tried to target the 3 ways that students gather information. One is through lecture, so we have things set up for presentations and lecture type a lecture type environment within the media center. We obviously have the books, and then we also have a small area where there are computers. I believe we have 10 computer stations in this area, so that you can actually get online data and do your research there within the development, or within the media center. So we're trying to tap into all the different ways that students can access information in our multimedia center. The technology lab is also going to be able to accommodate over 30 students, and everything is hardwired in that area for our testing. And again, we think this is a real advantage over what we had before, which was not nearly enough technology in the spaces to get a full testing lab and a full teaching lab. So those are the primary areas of improvement within the school. We were not able to expand the gymnasium, but the gym that's going in is a new gym. We'll have a new floor, and hopefully it'll serve the students well. And with that, yeah. Whoops. Can we get to the beginning?
Let's see. Should automatically sequence.
Okay. Terry? That's not the beginning. There we go. Thank you.
The end.
And that's the end. As you can see, we're not done yet.
That PowerPoint presentation was courtesy of Sarah Oakes, who did a nice job collecting photos that go back almost 3 years next month, actually, to characterize the devastating fire and then the work that's taken place since. I think it's a great example and illustration of what we'll see in other schools as we go about modernizing them. We certainly learned quite a bit, and much of what we did learn, I know we will apply to other projects that we would take on. So at this time, I'd like to take any questions or comments from the board.
Anybody want to go? I'll go.
I think that fire is just a reminder of how horrific that day was for all of us, and yet also how joyous it was in that our school staff responded so appropriately, and our emergency personnel responded so appropriately in getting all of our children out of the school safely that day. And it was also a testament to Portland Public Schools that within about a week, and to our community really, that within about a week we had all of those children back in another school, and with teaching and learning happening again. And this is just so exciting to see this construction happening on time, on budget. As many will recall, in our bond in 2011, we tried to include Marysville so that if we were going to be redoing half the school, wouldn't it make some sense to take the opportunity to include the fire money from the insurance and rebuild the whole school? But that didn't happen, and so now we're doing the next best thing that we could. But I'm just so thrilled to know that our Marysville kids are going to be back in January and back home, and as it turns out, to a much nicer facility. So it's I appreciate all of the good work that the staff has done, and all of the community support we've had throughout this entire adventure, and the patience of the Marysville staff and the Marysville families, because it has been a huge hardship. It's just so exciting that we're going to have them back soon, though. So it's pretty neat.
I guess I just, you mentioned, in our report, it mentioned that it's on budget, but I just wanted to verify that it's not only on time, but it's on budget. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, that's great. And the second thing is I just want to echo, I know how excited the folks at Marysville are to be home. And as you pointed out, it's been 3 years, and I know that there were lots of reasons, one of being the bond. But I look forward to celebrating with the community to be back home. And I really appreciate the efforts that you guys have put in to engage both the community and the teachers. It's a really important step to doing that, and it's great. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thanks for the great photos.
Wonderful job.
It was really great to watch the whole process evolve by the photos, so thank you for capturing all that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next item, which is the civic use of buildings. An update on that. I think we have heard, and I think some testimony before from people in the community. They have benefited from the use of the buildings, and I think that the praise that was also given in regards to the use of this building, knowing also that I would just this weekend, close to my house, at George School. I mean, there was a health, kind of affair that was happening through the Mexican consulate and benefiting the Latino community, but also, a cup, soccer cup tournament for health also took place there. So I know that were a number of things that were happening. So I mean, this is just one example of those things happening. So I'm glad that you're here to talk about that.
And actually, I'm handing right over to Tony, but there's been a lot of question about just how widespread the civic use of our buildings are. And we have a whole process in Portland Public Schools that is how both partner agencies and community members access our buildings in the time when they're not being used by students. So Tony's going to give a report kind of looking at the broad scope of what that use is. Tony Magliano.
Thank you. Good evening, Board, Superintendent. My name's Tony Magliano. I'm the Interim Deputy Chief Operations Officer. As part of the Board of Education's work plan, staff was asked to provide informational reports to the board on a series of topics. And tonight, I actually have a double feature to the civic use of buildings and capital project performance. The first is our civic use of buildings program, which offers after schools access to a variety of users, stakeholders, partners, ranging from for-profit organizations, nonprofits, our own internal educational programs, child care providers, and other public agencies. Our CUB program aligns nicely with the work that was accomplished through our community-led long-range facilities plan development. Specifically, one of the goals about optimizing utilization of our schools while taking the consideration of our academic programs, considering those. And in fact, many of our civic use of buildings programs after hours align, extend, or enhance the programs we offer in our buildings. I also wanted to let the board know that we recently transitioned to an online web-based reservation system, which brings integrity to our data, transparency, and reduces, it gets us away from filling out paperwork and faxing it, more using technology to become more efficient. In the attached to the informational report the board has, I want to highlight just a few statistics around the program that I think bring light to just how many users we have in our buildings. In fact, in FY 11-12, nearly 203,000 separate spaces were rented out. So gyms, classrooms, fields, cafeterias. In the report, you see that referred to as bookings. That's what a booking is. Gross revenue of approximately $760,000 that came in with regard to the fees that we charge to use these spaces. And the estimated attendance of nearly 3.5 million users. Now this is kind of like Disneyland in that we get repeat users, multiple, and this is based off of the requester's estimated number of people that would attend. We're not actually head counting, but that's what people projected would be in attendance at their users. Tonight I would like to introduce two of our partners that can highlight what the CUB program brings to their organizations and the community they serve. And tonight we have Warren Jimenez, who is the Assistant Director at Portland Parks and Recreation, and we have Tony Hahn, who's with Mosaic Games. And I'd like to turn it over to them, and then I'll come back for questions after they're done.
Welcome, and please introduce yourself for the record.
Thanks for having us here. Warren Jimenez, I'm the Assistant Director of Portland Parks and Recs.
Tony Hand, the President of Mosaic Games.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I guess I'll kick it off. Portland Parks and Recreation was awarded, currently the National Gold Medal Award winner for excellence, which is the highest achieving award in the Portland Parks and Recs system. So it was voted the #1 system in the nation this past year. At least we get to hang on to that title for one more week until a new winner comes along that will be announced next week at a national conference in Anaheim. So we're going to claim every bit of it to the last second that we can take it. But the reason why I point that out is because obviously we don't do that alone. We do that because of very unique partnerships that we have in place. And one of those very unique partnerships is with Portland Public Schools. It is absolutely critical to our success to have those types of unique partnerships in place. And it benefits our community. More importantly, it benefits our kids and our youth in the community that we love. And so I just wanted to point out just a couple areas and a couple numbers that I, quite frankly, are pretty amazing in terms of the numbers. The areas I just want to talk about real quickly is just around how we use the fields, how we use the gyms, how we use the pools, and then talk a little bit about Sun Schools. This year, in terms of fields and the number of teams that we had a chance to engage, 9,000 kids playing soccer, 6,000 kids playing Little League Baseball, 1,200 playing lacrosse, and 1,000 playing rugby, which is pretty astounding. When's the last time we played rugby, Matt? Has it been a while? Has it been a while? Okay. Without these opportunities to use these fields, we would only be able to capture about 40% of these kids through our current system. So the demand for fields is incredibly high, and without this partnership, we wouldn't be able to access or get those kids active in our community. Basketball program, gyms, really important to the success of our basketball program, which benefits kids 3rd through 12th grade. And last year, we registered over 270 teams. And majority of those played in your gyms, which is really important to the success of those programs. Also, 450 kids participated on the Saturday Youth Volleyball program, again, happening in your gyms. Portland Parks and Recs has access to a lot of different pools, indoors and outdoors, but we also use some of your facilities as well at Buckman and Wilson. People get to enjoy open swim times, water aerobic classes, and swim lessons at those pools. Sun Schools, again, is another unique partnership between Rex and Portland Public Schools. Believe it or not, 2013 will mark the 35th anniversary of that partnership where Portland Parks and Rex has run Sun Schools in Portland Public Schools facilities. So that partnership has existed for a long time. In the past year, over 3,200 youth and even some adults participated in over 1,000 classes and activities. Participants receive various supports around academic and enrichment and recreational opportunities, as well as social services through that system. And I think we're all very familiar with that system. You know, one of the things that we get asked in our community, which is an interesting question, is why don't you team up with Portland Public Schools and do stuff together? And the reality is that's happening, and we're proud of that partnership. And I'm just here just to say thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
My name is Tony Han. Again, I'm the president of Mosaic Games, and what we are is we're a after-school program, and we're formed with the purpose of challenging young minds with stimulating mental activities. By keeping the fun in these activities, we try to teach kids important lessons that they can learn in life, such as sportsmanship, teamwork, problem solving, critical thinking, concentration, and patience. And so a lot of these programs we offer through several activities such as chess, which Portland Public Schools has offered for many years throughout the thing, and I've helped with Chess for Success in their tournaments that they run at several schools. We also teach Legos and after-school programs and computer game making as well. One of the problems that we run into frequently is where do we offer these programs? If we didn't have use of Portland Public Schools, what we would have is to go to local churches or rent out local facilities. And because of the ease of kids staying after school and returning to a very local environment, it's very easy for kids to get out of school and these activities become an extension of their day instead of an event that they have to go and return to during at some time later in the day. The ability for us to use these schools in a local environment is also very helpful. We do a lot of activities with private schools, such as Oregon Episcopal School and a lot of Archdiocese schools. A lot of those people actually go back home and then come to some of the programs at Portland Public. So they actually use the facility locally. We have been working with civic use of buildings for about 6 years now, and I've really enjoyed my time with them. One of the reasons I'm here is I've actually complimented them on the ease of use of the program they have. I've dealt with school districts from all over Greater Portland, from Wilsonville to Vancouver, Gresham to Forest Heights, and it's always been a pleasure to deal with the ladies at Civic Use of Buildings. So I want to thank you for letting us use your facilities, and that would be it. Have a nice night.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Questions?
Questions, anybody?
Let us off easy.
Jim, any questions?
I think it's
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I guess I would be a little remiss if I didn't recognize Patty Christensen and Debbie Palermus have been working in our civic use of building office for quite some time, and they do good customer service with everyone and are appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay, you can just carry on with your double billing.
Yes,
You want-
no,
Yeah,
we can.
okay.
So I just really appreciate this, and it's wonderful to see partners we don't often hear from that we know are in our buildings all the time, and it's great to see them and hear from them. And just thanks for all your good management of this. So I guess it's more just a sort of a comment. I mean, just always that balance, because we hear often from particularly neighborhood, like when you're out in a neighborhood association meetings and in the community with wanting it to be easier. And I have noticed, actually, at least in Southwest, I hope elsewhere in the city as well, more and more neighborhood associations meeting in schools and the library, which is fantastic. So that's great to see. But just that balance of, oh, why can't we get free access to the schools, and knowing that we're obviously in extremely tight budget times and needing to be accountable to the public for stewardship of the resources, and at the same time having one of our main goals to be greater community access and use of our buildings. So just recognizing that as kind of a challenge or a tension going forward. And I don't know if you guys have talked more about that, or if that came out in the long-range facility plan discussions at all. If just that philosophical kind of balancing act between open access for community-based groups versus the need for Portland Public Schools to also be able to charge and recoup some of the costs involved.
Well, I know if I turn behind my desk and I look on my whiteboard, there's this big check block that has civic use of buildings procedures and policies and rates as something we, as a district, we need to look at. And it's not just, there's a variety of internal and external stakeholders that need to be involved in that. It's related to partnerships and you're right, managing taxpayers' money. So we will be looking at that whole, and equity is deep in it as well. So we need to put some rigor into the whole program.
And it also gets back to the piece that Mr. Jimenez mentioned, just the lack of awareness sometimes in the public, A, that it's available, or B, that it is happening all the time and constantly. So sometimes it can be that the sense that there isn't access when actually there is, and folks are going in the buildings all the time. But again, just to emphasize, yes, particularly for the audience, that really is a key goal for all of us, that the buildings, particularly as they're being improved and rebuilt, that they'll be like at Rosa Parks, our one of our only new school buildings. You walk in the front door, there's this glass-walled community access room that's used by parents and community groups. So there's just a great example of literally the open walls that you can go in and have a meeting there. So anyway, I just wanted to highlight that a little bit.
I guess I just wanted to follow up on that. When I was touring the new facility at Sandy High School, that they actually designed the new building with that in mind. And so, for example, the library had outside access.
Right.
So, for example, in our current schools, I think of most schools I go into, and if I'm going to go into a meeting, which I do lots of,
Right.
I have to walk through the main entrance, down the hall, usually to hang a you know what I mean? Like I
Right.
have to trek through the school
Right.
versus allowing the custodian to get their work done
Right.
in the rest of the school while we might just be using the
Right.
library. So.
Which is a great security piece too, to
Right.
have, as well as ease of access. So, yeah, it's really exciting to see how the buildings can be configured differently to make them more flexible and usable to the community.
It was one thing when I was originally as a parent on the design team for Forest Park, which was our second newest building. That was a huge discussion in terms of the design team, so that we could invite members into the community to use, for example, the cafeteria or the gymnasium, but basically close off the rest of the school. So, it was safe and secure, and the custodian didn't have to worry about that, while the other part was for community use. So I think as we go, all of our new buildings will likely be designed for, day use by students where it's all open, but night use where certain parts are open as appropriate, which makes a ton of sense. One of the things I always think about in terms of community use of school is that we used to, as community members, vote in our school buildings. And it's the one part of vote by mail that makes me sad, because everything else is great about vote by mail. But we no longer have the opportunity for, pretty much every registered voter to be in our buildings, at least, often once, twice a year, whatever it might be. And so I think in the presentation today, we've been talking a lot about community use by students or kids, but there is still huge community use by adults. And as an example, my husband and I were on a dodgeball team a couple of years ago, and we were in the school buildings all the time, throwing balls at each other and creating mayhem, and it was great fun. So I guess one of the questions that I would have as we go is, I know that the Parks Department advertises the different programs that happen in our buildings, but do we actually publicize to the 80% of folks who don't have kids in school, that they can use these buildings, or how do we go about that? Yeah, do we market them? Do we advertise? I know I brought our homeowners association and neighborhood association through our elementary school recently, and I was like, and we can rent this out, and everybody was like, wow, really? I mean, it seems like folks hopefully would know that, but I don't know.
It hasn't been a practice that we're well versed in, and it has come to light, particularly around our great fields and
Yeah,
promoting the empty space on them, and how do we do that? But you point out very well, it's actually broader than just the field. It's about the entire program.
And it's good for us to have our community in the schools a lot.
Right.
So anyway, it's just something for us to think about as we go, is how we can kind of publicize a little bit better. These are community buildings, and they're there for community use. So even if there is a little fee to cover the custodians.
I was just going to highlight both to make this possible. I know that it seems like the building's there and it should theoretically be free, but the challenges and the pressure that puts on both custodians and principals, because what winds up happening is when a group shows up and expecting this or that, they're going to run into the decision maker at the building, and that will either be the custodian or principal. So I just want to highlight that I think we were far ahead of the curve of trying to figure out how to manage our facilities, because I know that other districts came late to it or are still coming to it. So thank you for that, and I just want to call out the principals and the custodians, because I know that they're the people on the ground that wind up having to challenge about, do I have my dance team? Oh my goodness, I have conferences, and trying to manage all that with the help of civic use. So
Good.
So we're going to move to the next item, which is capital projects update.
So this report highlights most of our recent capital projects and is being presented as it relates into part, again, the board's work plan, in that the board identified some areas that they wanted to monitor. While this particular topic wasn't called out specifically, it does relate to both the long-range facilities plan and the capital asset renewal policy. And as you know, FAM's primary funding source for capital projects has been a $3 million general fund allocation. I think it's important, though, to recognize that we've done fairly well at leveraging other funding sources, either through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act or the SB Senate Bill 1149, also known as Cool Schools program. We've even made decisions to take on debt if the payback for a particular project was beneficial for us. So I just wanted to highlight a few of those projects. Beginning with the solar roofs in 2009, started out to roof 9 of our buildings, and then in partnership with Girding Edelin Sustainable Solutions, we added thin film solar panels to that work. These panels produce about 19% of the electricity that those buildings use, which translates roughly over a 20-year period to about $1 million in energy usage savings or avoided costs. So that's pretty significant in that project alone. And as I go through this, I think at the end I'll summarize how all of these little projects add up to some pretty significant either avoided costs or savings for the district. Right now, we have the Recovery Zone Bond Project, which is actually still underway. It was in 2010, as part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, we responded to an RFI, request for information from the city, where we identified several projects that would meet the criteria for these energy efficiency projects. The city selected us and awarded, passed that bond on to us. This memorandum that I provided the board highlights many individual projects that have been completed and several more that are still underway. They should all be completed by December of 2013. The annual expected savings, once these projects are completed, is about $1.25 million. And I'd also like to, recognize, some positive steps the board made with regard to that too, as it ties to the capital asset renewal policy. The board designated that once that debt is retired, that $1.2 million debt service goes into the capital asset renewal fund, which then in turn goes toward maintaining our recent capital investments or any new or newly modernized or renovated buildings in the future. So this is the way that we begin, to set aside funding to take care of our highly valuable capital assets. SB 1149, Senate Bill 1149 is another funding source we've used to do many projects. And they're specifically designated for energy efficiency projects. Typically, water projects do not qualify. And look at this, I have to put on glasses because my eyes are getting blurry. Yeah. So, under this program, we've completed more than 150 energy projects with an estimated annual energy savings of approximately $384,000. A few other large projects we've done, of course, the Marshall transition, getting Franklin and Madison ready to accept kids from Marshall, students from Marshall, and also the Boys Elliott Humboldt consolidation. Both of those projects focused on assisting and providing the robust academic programming that we were trying to do in those schools. Some of the highlights, the health clinic at Franklin, new science labs at both Franklin and Madison, child care center at Madison, and dozens of other program and classroom upgrades. At Boise Elliott, upgrading the library and modifying existing classrooms to be able to hold more students in those schools. Some of the things as I alluded to a little earlier, that I'm most proud of with the work that we've done revolves around the energy efficiency and savings. So between FY 10-11 and FY 11-12, so the two previous years, our energy use went down by about 6.5%. Since FY 07-08, where we baselined our energy usage, it's gone down by about 13%. So today, what that means for us is we've saved or avoided about $5.2 million in utility costs. Had we not done all the things we're doing, our utility budget would be about $5 million more than what it is today. So that's a real savings to the general fund. And between FY 10-11 and FY 11-12, some more statistics that are called out in the report you have. About 1.8 million kilowatt hours of electricity, which is equivalent to about $185,000 a year. We've less usage around fuel oil, about 223,000 gallons less of fuel oil, which is another $714,000 a year, and about 10.7 million gallons of water, Water's pretty cheap though, $105,000. But when you add all those numbers together, that's $1 million less that we could have spent had we not done this type of work. So I think that's something to be proud of. I would be remiss also if I didn't say that there's other benefits to this work in terms of impact on the environment. You think of the carbon footprint and just energy usage in general. And I would also like to say that some of these savings are attributed to our users as well, our building occupants, who all of our schools have various programs, whether it's their electricity team running around at the end of the day, making sure all the computers are shut off or the lights are off. So a lot of education using our AmeriCorps team to go out and educate building users. So all of that adds up and contributes to these numbers. So if you have any questions.
Director Sark.
I think this is a really great report. Over the years that I've been on the board, I've heard about a lot of these projects as they were in process, and so it's great to see the results, that we're saving energy and we're saving money. I wanted to just ask about the boiler burner project that was going on this summer. How many of those were completed, and where we are in that project?
Our target was to have 33 of the 47 schools done by October 15th, and we're on target to have that done. Right now, we have, as of today, 23 schools. We had a boiler up and running at those schools. Tomorrow we have 3 more coming online, but I also have to thank Mother Nature for the nice weather we've had, because we were praying a lot for that, and we've gotten it. And October 15th was all of our deadline, and it looks like the weatherman's calling for October 15th to be that cold day that we were expecting. So once we get those 33 schools done, we have to take a breath. We have to figure out how we go after the next group, and whether we're bold enough to try to do some over winter break when we have about 14 total days, and weigh the risk, talking with our contractor that we've been working closely with, because the last thing we want to do is open up a school and then find out, when they come back on after Christmas break, we can't get the heat on. So right now we're real optimistic. There's a lot. I mean, it's tasking our maintenance workforce now, because as you can imagine, the maintenance with our boilers has been an issue. So we get a vendor, we're upgrading things, and then we find things that are maintenance responsibility to fix, whether it's a control issue or a water drainage issue or a compressor issue. So even our maintenance workforce is working, the weekends to help get this project complete. So.
Right. Well, that's great. So that's exciting that you'll get to the 33 and then just keep figuring out how to get the rest of them done, because it's a big savings, and it's a big improvement in terms of not burning all that heavy fuel oil that is very polluting, in addition to being very expensive. So
I know it's early days, but do you have any sense? I mean, one of the additional benefits was last time for the custodians to be coaxing the ancient outdated equipment along. So is there any sense yet when the schools that are online, or I guess not, because it's been 2 nights and they haven't really been using it. Yeah. So it would be great to find out, like, later on in the year, even just by a quick written, update that we can share with folks how that's going. And
so kind of the feeling, how the custodians are feeling about.
Because those awful, when you'd visit and you'd see these nasty, blackened, sooty places where they were trying to, and then the time that they were spending trying to keep them alive day in and day out. So anyway.
Well, and if you've walked into any of our boiler rooms and saw how dirty the natural, you should be able to walk in the future and they're clean. That'll be one sign right there.
Yeah.
I know that's true in my furnace room in my house. When we got rid of our old furnace, it was much cleaner.
Yeah.
It was great.
I think one of the things the Director Atkin was mentioning in regards to not only the communication to the external side, to to the public in regards to what's going on with that project, but I'm wondering in regards to how much communication have we done internally, like say at the building itself, and say, okay, here's our progress in regards to this thing, and here's our expected deadline for this project, to be able to say, to the teachers, to the rest of the workers in that building. Can you?
Well, so we work very closely with the principal on all these projects that we do in the building. As a matter of fact, that's like the number one thing on our checklist, so that the principal's aware of what's the impact on the building, when the project's going to be completed. We offer to share an educational piece, like we did on the solar roof when we did the kiosks, or when we did the windmill up at Skyline. The vendor came in and they did a project around the electricity that's generated off that. So we're more than willing to do that piece if the school's open to it as well. Is that?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to I guess emphasize the importance of communication, not just with one individual in that building, because I think that we all have different ways of communicating. Like I get this report here today. How many people do I reach with that report? I mean, we have an advantage that is getting to the cable TV, but I don't have cable TV, for example, so I'm not going to get to see it in regards to this update. And I don't work in the buildings or go often enough to be able to, when a teacher approaches me about this thing or says, hey, how well together do they have it here in regards to this thing? I couldn't tell them exactly, because I don't necessarily know the timeline for that particular building.
Mm-hmm.
So it's emphasizing, I think, the importance of the more communication, I think, the better it is for everybody. And to perhaps include that as part of the regular update that principals do carry, but it's different ways people hear it.
Right.
Some people like myself are very visual, learn by something that is in writing. Other people kind of hear it. Other people do some other stuff. But anyway, it's just again a reminder, I think, for all of us to make sure that we communicate.
Yeah, I'll just echo that if I were sitting in a building and the boiler were out right now, and we say that the nice weather has been, but it's been pretty chilly in the morning, and so my guess is the buildings take some time to warm up. So if I were a teacher who may or may not have made the staff meeting or gotten something from my principal, I think as we look forward, and hopefully with the passage of our bond, as we're doing more construction, that oversharing information is probably just really important, that because then people know when there's a deadline or when to expect it. Most people can put up with most things if they know that there's going to be an end to it and when that's going to happen. So.
On time and on budget. I love it. It's great. It's really good.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Now for the fun part. I think we've been waiting for. I think we all have been wanting to, I think, engage a bit more and find out more in regards to the high school schedule update. So, Superintendent Smith, if you want to introduce this item.
I do, and I will just say this is, again, as Tony was referencing, the monitoring column in the board work plan really outlined what are things that we're going to touch back and see what the progress, what's the status of those things that we've set in motion. And I'll ask Sue Ann Higgins, our Chief Academic Officer, and Tripp Goodall, our Director of High Schools, to come on up. And I would also just like to acknowledge that we have a number of our high school principals in the room tonight. So Margaret Calvert from Jefferson, Shay James from Franklin, Vivian Orland from Grant, Carol Campbell from Benson, Peyton Chapman from Lincoln, and I don't know that anybody else came in while I turned around, but who are present for the conversation tonight. And this, I'm going to draw a distinction. We had an earlier testimony about high school system design. That was a process we went through about really getting viably sized high schools and offering challenge and support in each school, and a number of other things that were our vision for what we wanted to accomplish in our high schools. We then had a subsequent schedule change at high schools and went to an 8-period block that was about a budget reduction. So we're doing these in 2 separate conversations. So tonight we're really looking at a discussion about the schedule change, what's the impact of the schedule change. You've got data in front of you that takes you through for each high school campus, 3 years, and I gave this to you at the last board meeting just so you had a chance to look at it prior to tonight. But that really takes you through period by period and what kind of, what number of students are accessing what number of periods in the day over the last 3 years. So you've got some comparative data. On your seats tonight, you had communications that went out to families at the spring prior to the year we just completed, explaining to them the thinking about why and how we were going to implement this particular schedule change. So you have a letter from our then Chief Academic Officer, Carla Randall, in May to families. You have a family advisory that went out about the schedule change for high schools that's got a bunch of the underpinnings and the thinking at the time. And then you have a Q&A or a question and answer series about questions that people were raising. So this is mostly to ground us back in the thinking at the point we set this in motion. And then tonight what we're going to do is walk through what are the impacts, how are we thinking about it, what are we looking at in, as we go forward. So I'll turn it over to Sue Ann to start the conversation.
Good evening. I wanted to begin by saying that the shift to an 8-period day for the student day was, as Superintendent Smith said, a reaction to what wasn't a one-time budget reduction, but looking into a continuing future of resource depletion. And so utilizing a model that's used statewide and nationally quite widely to provide access to the Common Core program and maintain course offerings wherever possible at the same time that we sustain significant budget reductions. So our goals were to manage our desire for students to have continued access to courses, access to instructional time, and a full student day where they could. And so one of the documents that you saw tonight was in the spring of 2011, documentation about the average number of courses students were taking prior to these decisions, and then tonight Trip will discuss more about sort of where we are in terms of an update there. So, we'll also be able to, so we want to sort of narrate how we got here a little bit, how it's going now, and then we know you may have some questions as well. So I want to say, though, from the get-go, the decision to shift to this 8-period day and this particular model was not, it wasn't driven by a desire or a sense that this would improve programming overall. So it was, from the get-go, a less than ideal scenario that we were facing. And when the decision was made, it was, mitigate in every possible way negative outcomes for students. And so, I want to commend all the principals, both here and not here tonight, as well as their teaching staffs, for really doing a phenomenal job under complex circumstances to revise decades-old scheduling models to make this work really well for students. So my hat is absolutely off to all of them as instructional leaders and their devotion to making sure that kids have access to strong core program as well as meeting our other ambitions around elective offerings, world language, the arts, etc. So with that, Trip.
Okay, I'm part of that club too, so I'm going to put my glasses on. I want to thank you for the opportunity tonight to talk a little bit about an update on our high school schedule, and I also want to make sure that I don't get the chance publicly to acknowledge the high school principals especially those that are here tonight. They are involved in incredibly challenging, complex work. I know you know that, but again, I don't get that opportunity too often to really say that in a public arena such as this one. And so I am incredibly fortunate to work with such an accomplished group of educators. So it's a terrific team to be a part of. You have in front of you some documents, as Superintendent Smith indicated earlier, one of which is this 3-year data report. You also have those 3 communications that went out to the public. One is a question and answer. Another one is a family advisory bulletin that detailed the decision to go to an 8-period block day. And then lastly, there is the letter from our previous CAO, Carla Randall, just really giving you, I think, again, some background in terms of how we communicated to the public this decision, and internally as well. If you take a look at those documents, and we'll start with this one that you have in front of you, and this one, which was the question and answer that was put out in 2011, you have, I think, some opportunity to trace kind of the evolution of the 8-period block day as it went out, which I think is critically important. The most current document, the color document that you have, does in fact show the percentages. And as Scott alluded to earlier, sometimes you get caught up in the percentages and things like that. But I think it is important to use it as a sort of a moment of comparison. The document that you have, that's the question and answer one in 2011, actually did chart out by school the percentage of students that were taking at least 7 classes. This document shows you students that are taking all the way up through 8 classes, right? And you can see that there's obviously some differences there. On average, the district went up to 6.6 from what I believe was 6.4 when you look at that. And again, we're just looking at percentages. If you look at this document, I want to make sure that I point out on the last page, it does indicate that early release, late arrival, study hall, teaching assistant positions are not included in this data. So this is students taking classes, right? The next piece of information that I provided for you last week is this chart, which gives you the current sort of preliminary look at what we're doing in our high schools with regard to our schedules. If you take a look across the top, the columns are the number of AP IB classes with their average size, the number of dual enrollment, dual credit classes that we currently are offering in our schools, freshman academy information, number of academic support classes and average size, and then I included information on our current study hall situations in our schools. And I wanted to point out that many of our study halls today are much more what I would consider a tutorial opportunity, where we have peer mentors. We have, in some cases, university students working with our students. We have significant help in 4 of our high schools around a voluntary public school choice grant that allows us to do some online credit recovery, as well as present time credit completion in those what we call study halls. But again, I think they've really evolved into something much more than that. At a future board meeting, I will be coming back and giving you an update on where we are at with the implementation of the high school systems design process. It's been an ongoing study, obviously, since it was implemented last year, to determine what we've been able to maintain and preserve out of that original document, given the fact that there have been some extraordinary fiscal constraints. And so I'll leave you with that.
Can I ask a clarifying question first? On this document,
Yes.
where it's just study hall size by period,
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying is for period 1 and period 8 for each of these days, if a child ends up not coming in for the first period because they essentially have a study hall, they won't necessarily show up on this list?
On this one they will. Yeah, I think if you're
Okay,
referring
let
to
me
this
see.
one.
So the number of courses a student is taking, this one did not include study hall classes. So
Okay.
what I was
Correct.
trying to show you was, so how many classes are kids taking? However, on this one, when we're giving data about
Mhm.
study hall loads, those are the study halls that kids are in and when they're in them.
So
And-
33 people at
When we did this
Cleveland period
preliminary
one
snapshot.
wouldn't have a first period class
And so those would be considered our late arrivals. So there would only be 33 late arrival kids
at Cleveland.
at Cleveland High School?
So these are not late arrival
These are
students.
not- these are
kids
students
scheduled
actually in a study hall.
Right. So if
As a
they're a
class.
late arrival instead, where would they show up?
They would not show up on this
That's what I was
study hall.
asking.
Yeah.
So what would they show up as? I mean, if they're a late arrival, that means they're not taking a class that period, isn't it?
Right, so that's, you would see them on this document that would show how many students are taking which classes during which periods in each high
Mhm.
school. So, does that make sense? So these are showing you two different looks at this. They're measuring two different things.
It would just be a hole in their schedule. I mean, if they have late arrival or early release, that just wouldn't be part of their schedule. It wouldn't show up on this document here. They're
What's
not
the
in a
difference
study
between
hall.
a hole in your schedule and a study hall?
A study hall is where you're actually in a room under supervision of an adult, hopefully working on your schoolwork.
And you sign up for a study hall.
You are signed up for the study hall.
So you're
Late
also-
arrival, early release is really you're on your own.
So you're also not including teacher assistants in these numbers either. That's not a class. These are
Correct.
academic classes.
Correct.
The study halls are academic classes?
These are academic classes.
These are academic classes, I
So
get
look
that.
on the,
Right.
on the bottom of
Mhm.
this one, it tells you what's being excluded from the definition of class for the purposes of this piece of data.
I think
Mhm.
that what you're getting at and what we don't have is we don't have an easy way to visualize how many kids have that first period free and don't have to be at school for that first period or the last part. So for example, I often hear from community feedback is my kid doesn't have to be until X, Y, or
9:30.
Z.
Mhm.
Or my kid's done at noon. But the number of kids that for whom that is not clearly identified. Is that right? I can look at percentages, or I don't have exact numbers. Is that right?
Mhm.
Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So if you looked at the Q&A document, the four-page
Mhm.
one from 2011 showed by grade how many students had at least 7 courses. And so you would see that district-wide, only 27% of all students had what we at that time called a full schedule or 7-period schedule. And so we have
I'm
not
sorry, can I-
crosswalked that.
Okay, can I
Correct.
interrupt just real quick? But that doesn't necessarily mean that hole in their schedule was at the beginning or the end of the day. It could have been in the middle of the day.
It could have been.
Right.
Right, and it could still now be.
Yeah.
So you do have numbers for kids who are in study halls. You don't have numbers that quantify how many are getting late arrivals or early releases. Right.
Do you want that number?
You probably have it somewhere.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
we can deduce
Yeah.
it, but we don't have it as a
I
number,
would-
Yeah.
right?
I would like that number.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
it would be helpful to understand when our kids are in classes or not.
And along with that, I mean, I think the definition in regards to, I mean, late arrival or early release is more of whether it's a choice or actually there is no option. You know what I mean? Because there is a difference in regards to if we're gonna look at putting value on that part. I mean, I'm not sure how that will be useful, so I'm trying to get to it that way.
Mhm.
At least for me, trying to understand that part.
Right.
I guess one of my questions would be, if a kid doesn't have, obviously we know that on average, students are signed up for 6.5 classes. So, but if they don't have a class, they don't necessarily have a study hall. So they're not just automatically assigned to a study hall.
Correct.
So they asked to be in a study hall? Is it certain grade levels you must be in a study hall? I mean, is there any kind of structure around this decision of whether they're in a study hall? Maybe if there's only 30 kids in there, they might be studying. If there's 147 kids in there, that's probably pretty tough environment, and there might be some ways to structure that, but that's be pretty difficult. I mean, how does it happen that a kid is either in a study hall or not?
So it's school by school, counselors and students determining what the students' needs are, whether they need additional tutorial, what course offerings are available given a student. So, for instance, whatever world language a student is in determines when they can have flexibility for their other core courses. And so, so that may be a driver in terms of what lands where in their schedule. Their skills overall, so whether or not they need access to a specific skill building course, whether or not they, or whether they are on track or ahead of their graduation requirements in terms of credits, and determines both where there's flexibility around late arrival, early release, and some of the choices about where their course schedule sits. So it's very individual, and so counselors, parents, and students navigate this together.
And I think it's important to know too, if you don't have the staffing to be able to provide other courses for students, you have to have students to have an opportunity to go somewhere. And so I think that's at issue here as well.
So if it's the middle of the day, and I have third period and there isn't anything that I can take, can I just say, well, I just don't want to be here at that time. I'm going to go home during that period. Or do I have to go into study hall?
I think that's school to school, but I think what the principals did extraordinarily well this year was to try and create schedules where our 9th, 10th, and 11th graders had classes scheduled in such a way as they had either an early release or a late arrival, and not that middle of the day issue. I mean, I would defer to some of the principals here, but I think that's primarily what we did. If you didn't notice, that was an affirmative nod.
I see one nod.
You're not getting
I thought I saw more than
I
one.
see inquisitive looks from others.
I could take a TA, or I could.
You could be a TA, which a number of kids have done that.
My kids were TAs. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, but so basically, though, what you're saying is the principals and the counselors have worked to have kids either come to school late or leave early, so they don't have those holes in the middle of the day.
Correct.
So how they're using that time, we have no idea because they're not in school.
Exactly, and that's, I mean, I guess I would say that's a family's choice as well, to make that decision.
Unless they're in a study hall, and then they're on campus.
And they're on campus.
So, I have a question. And this is, I guess, more of a clarifying, but it looks like on average we're seeing students, we're seeing the number of real classes on the colored sheet actually go up for each high school. Each campus looks like every single one, it's gone up.
That's correct. That's correct. So the average has gone up from 6.4 classes per student to 6.62.
Right.
So there's a small increase in the average, and then some schools, the increase has been larger, others, closer to what it has been. But in no cases has it gone backwards from last year, from 10-11 to 11-12, which is the year that we're trying to take a look at.
Right.
And 11-12 to 12-13 this year. So again, it's an improbable feat that our high school administrators and their staffs have actually put together a plan on on a much more complex model to schedule with fewer adults in all of the buildings to have more class
classes.
opportunities for kids. So this is, I see this as a real, very, very impressive win on the parts of our kids and community at a time when this would not have been our ideal model, so.
Right. I mean, in at least a couple cases, the average has gone up one whole class almost, so it's pretty significant.
Yeah.
But isn't it true that taking 6 periods now in a 6 of 8 model compared to taking 6 classes before in a 6 of 7 is actually less instructional time?
Yes.
And what are we doing about that?
Well, we're looking at other districts right now to see whether or not there's any strategies that they're using to try and address the loss of class time. We certainly haven't cut days. We've done as well as we can given this schedule and the constraints that we have right now with regard to why we went to the 6 or the 8 period block schedule rather. So I think Tigert and Tualatin, we talked with them last week, comparable schedule that we have. Beaverton has something that they're doing with an advisory that we're going to look at to see whether or not there's a way that you can pick up some additional minutes that way. But yeah.
I think beyond that, though, there has been professional development in our high schools around how to really leverage the most out of class periods. One of the benefits of this schedule is it reduces the amount of passing time in a given day, so reduces the number of opportunities where kids might wander off or engage in something that is not productive. And so, so while the instructional minutes has declined in course by course, overall, the schedule still meets the state's minimum requirements, and so as compromises go, I'm confident that we will continue to see skill growth for our students and positive gains over time. So, and I mean, all of this in a time when we, also have added the state has added the additional expectations around essential skills, et cetera. So there's no question that it's a very complex task for high schools to pull off. So
I have a lot more questions.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay. So you mentioned that these study halls are more like tutorials. As far as the experience I'm hearing from parents and families, maybe it's not in the schools that I'm hearing from. So where is that happening, and what's the model, and is there a way that we can extend that across the district so that we have, because if you had kids in study hall actually doing all of their homework and getting help with their work, at least it would be more valuable time. And a structured study hall can really be helpful to students who need the help. So how is that happening, and how can we make it happen?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that we had a voluntary public school choice grant in our district that provided some additional funding for Madison, Jefferson, Franklin, and Benson to, initially we were looking at a learning center that would be in the afternoon, but the group of teachers that we hired to put this together really began to see the need to do it during the day, using the study hall as the model. And I mean, they've done some extraordinary work putting this together. Along with our online learning program, they've really combined their resources. And so currently we have in those 4 buildings a variation of something around this, but Benson comes to mind and Franklin comes to mind immediately. I know Carol could probably speak to what's happening at Benson. I'd love you to, yeah. Because I mean, I know that's a program that is certainly doing some great work around it.
We'd be happy to hear about that.
Okay.
Okay, well, I don't want to paint the picture that we've solved the problem, but we compressed our schedule so that most of our classes fall in periods 3 through 7, or 3 through 6, so that 1, 2, 7, and 8 are periods where we're putting freshman, sophomore classes to give them a full day of school. And those that don't have a full day of school then have late arrival or early release. And our study halls are 2 through 6, or 3 through 6, I'm sorry. We actually added 1-7 too. We changed the name to tutorial, so students, the perception would be that it's for work, not for just hanging out, which last year we made the newspaper because our study, you might remember the article, Benson, the picture was of 200 students in our cafeteria, but the text of the article was an interview with a principal in, I think, Park Rose or something. But, yeah, it's kind of embarrassing. But anyway, so we've reduced the numbers. I think our biggest one now is 60, but we created a space that has 2 computer labs and a work area. So our online learners are in there as well, with teachers who have expectations for checking in with students, seeing what they're working on every day, asking them if they have something to do, checking in with the online learners. So we're calling the space the Learning Center, and that came out of that grant. So we also have a person who's there part of the day to help us manage that space, who's not really responsible for the students, but helping us come up with ideas to provide opportunities for students to work together. We're thinking about getting some tutors. We've got some peer tutors, our own juniors and seniors who are capable of tutoring in there, but we'd like to get some PSU students, and that was also part of the grant, was to look at that. So what's not working is that we still have a lot of kids who have late arrival or early release, but they don't have open periods in the middle of the day, which was a problem for us last year. So I think, and we did that strategically to avoid that, because we had seniors who were, where Benson is, going over to Lloyd Center, coming back, and not having a class. That was problematic for us. So it's not ideal. It's not what we want to do, but I think making the tutorial more of an expectation for studying, getting your homework done, learning, has made it better than it was last year, and they're much smaller. We also have a volunteer that is trying to run a study hall at the end of our day for our athletes. So we've opened up the cafeteria for a drop-in. If you have a sport or a club after school, you can drop in there and have a place to work. And then our library is open all periods for drop-ins as well, which can create some problems in the library, but yeah. Is that good?
That was wonderful. Thank you.
So one of the things that we hear often from the community is comments like, these study halls are monitored by security guards. And I think what they're referring to is study halls being monitored by campus monitors. Do you have any sense of what percentage of our study halls are monitored by campus monitors? Because I have a follow-up question.
I don't know what the percentage is, so we haven't studied that. And anecdotally, we know that there are definitely some schools where that's the staff person available. And I don't think it's anyone's dream scenario. And yet, if principals had more teachers, they would be holding classes instead of study hall time. So, I mean, that's just one of the realities that we face. So,
well, my follow-up question is, clearly campus monitors had a purpose.
Yes.
Before they were study hall monitors.
Correct.
And who is doing that work now?
Most of the schools have 2 campus monitors.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think there's somebody doing the work. They may not have 2 that are patrolling the grounds, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm comfortable with what the principals have told me with regard to how they're utilizing their staff right now. I think if they, to a person, would say they would hope that they could have that restored to its fullest, but given where we're at right now, it's not possible. They're trying to maximize their staffing in the classroom.
campus monitors and principals use radios. There are rotations that happen if a campus monitor needs to be deployed to a particular situation, and an administrator or counselor can back them up, for coverage in the study hall. So they all have mechanisms in place. But Is it our most desirable model? No. So no one's here lobbying that it is.
Yeah, we're not lobbying to stay at this resource level, I will say that. Like, real clearly, this is making the best of a really scarce resource situation. And if, in fact, we were still funded at the level we were when we went to the 8-period block schedule and we hadn't reduced staff, we would have seen a great increase in programming for kids that we'd be really excited about. So I'm just going to say this is really, how are we mitigating a huge budget hole?
Yeah, I was just going to say something to that effect, is I feel like here you are trying to defend something that almost nobody wants to have happen, and none of our principals want to have happen. And I think the question then comes as we look at our budgets, as we look at our facilities. You know, I know that we'll get to high school redesign, but I know that I get questions about, it's a new world, which means it's continued to reduce since high school redesign. Are we right-sized, and what does that look like? And I know that we don't necessarily have facilities to do any more reduction to get people in them, but I think that question will come out of this. But I acknowledge that you're making, I mean, again, you guys are here saying, no, it's okay, when none of us think this is.
And I think really, like, I feel like we're paying tribute to the people who have worked to make something work that has been extremely challenging to make it work, and really maintain program for kids in a scarce resource environment. Maintain a school year, maintain program offering, maintain the ability to offer challenge and support on every campus. And it's been an act of extreme, when we say we become masters of improv, I'm going to say our principals have become the ultimate masters of improvisation and trying to figure out, okay, here we throw you one more challenge activity every year and say, how do we have kids still experience, you know, a quality program in our schools? So part of what this does do, though, is we are just at the beginning of district staffing team for the coming budget cycle, and we've got the same group of principals and central office folks, really actually depth of some people who've been on that for 4 years and really have their heads around what do our formulas mean. And so much of the, you know, what's worked, what hasn't out of this year feeds that conversation about what are the formulas we're setting up for the coming year. So, and the hope is, you know, people are projecting a pretty steady resource picture to the one we've currently got, or, you know, we're not looking at having a lot of new resource come in, so we're probably still working in the how do we make the best use of scarce resources, and we'll continue to do that. How do we do the best by kids with the resource we've got to work with?
Yes. Sorry, just one question that jumped out at me. There's, as I look at the numbers on the sheet, one school seems to have much larger study halls than some other. I'm sure that there's a reason for that, and I'd like to hear that.
It happens to be one of the buildings where we have that grant also, so it's been a big help.
So we actually chose not to let our freshmen and the majority of our sophomores have early release or late arrival. And so instead, they automatically are scheduled into a study hall unless parents opt out. I could probably count on both hands the amount of parents that have opted out of the study hall option as freshmen. And those are also, coincidentally, our largest classes. We also chose to schedule kids in study hall knowing that we were going to implement our online learning that will be happening in the study halls, and so we're in the process of doing that with the grant that Tripp has referred to. And in addition, we were waiting for the go-ahead to use peer mentors without that being counted against teacher caseloads. So once we got the okay for peer mentors, we've now secured the kids that are going to be doing peer mentors, and they'll be coming out of study hall. So we'll see those numbers start to go down as well, and they'll be used for the online.
Thanks.
So.
I had a feeling that there was a value behind it about we're just, as a community, we're not going to do this. We're going to, thank you.
Right. All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Director Sargent, I think you have additional questions.
Yeah, I have a couple. One is, understand there's a lot of problem solving going on in the buildings. It was interesting last spring talking to seniors about their experience under the new schedule because they had been in a different environment, and they had some pretty significant feedback about things that worked and things that didn't. And I wonder about our high schools, or as a system as a whole, taking advantage of that intelligence. The little anecdotal things was how hard it was for athletes if they missed a class on a regular basis because they had games. And if they missed, one day, that's like missing 2 days in previous years. It made it really hard for them to keep up in that class, and sometimes they would end up dropping it. Some of the students talked about how hard it was to have math every other day. So some of those things are we really looking at the best way academically to work with this schedule so that it meets kids' needs, and how are we doing that? I understand that maybe at Grant they have a little different model where they have an 8-period day on Mondays, so maybe that's an experiment. I'm just wondering, is that we're trying something different and seeing how it works there, or what's the...
Two schools are doing that, Lincoln and Grant.
Uh-huh. And the rationale behind
It's where
that?
it's the option to take a look at one of your days having the chance to see all of the students on your caseload. So it's a traditional, in some ways, schedule like we've seen in the past. So you're going to see all of your students on Monday to set the rest of the week up. So then you'll go A, B, A, B, rather than have an A, B, A, B, A schedule. It's a schedule that
So you know what every Wednesday, which
Yeah.
classes you have every day of the
Right.
week, as opposed to the rolling block that most of
It
our
was a
schools
schedule
use.
that I actually taught under in a district that I worked in at one time. And we did it for that purpose, to be able to see our students at least all in one day.
Well, that was one of the things
Yeah.
that the seniors told me, was that maybe if they could see all their teachers on Friday, so they knew what they were supposed to do going into the weekend. So Monday would be another way to,
Yep.
kind of get your week lined up.
Absolutely.
That could help students. So I'm interested in
Yeah, we'll-
hearing
we'll- yeah.
about how that turns out, and maybe that's a model to expand across the district.
So it's AB, and then on Friday, for example, it's all 7 or 8 classes.
C, right, yes.
And we're doing Monday.
Right.
You're-
Yeah, I think they
All
they
eight.
do it
Most
on
schools that I know of do it on Monday. It sets the week up for the students.
Okay.
So one of the other things that I thought we might hear about tonight, and I would like to hear about in the future, would be our academic results for our AP students and our IB students, because they have a certain curriculum they've got to get covered, and now they have a shorter instructional time. Are as many students taking the exams? How are they doing on the exams? What are the strategies around students succeeding academically so that they're ready for college, given that we don't have as much instructional time under this model? So I'd like to hear about those kinds of results.
And that is part of our plan for reporting in the larger high school system design implementation. So that is scheduled in November. So, so looking at sort of like what are all the data points that can tell us how our balance of support and challenge is going. And again, when all the elements of the high school system design were put into place, they weren't factored initially around the 8-period day and the changes that brought about. So now schools are implementing both simultaneously, and added to that, we've had an additional arbitration decision that further constrains flexibility for scheduling teachers. So we have the multiplied effect here, and so we look forward, though, to sharing with you about each of the components of high school system design and what the data looks like after 1 year of implementation, and how that looks as we are launched into the second year of implementation. So definitely plan to do that. Yeah. really, I mean, one of the earliest pieces of data we have is that our SAT scores did go up for, the graduating class of 2012, and by 13 points in reading, 12 points in writing, 10 points in math. So there was a notable gain there. Not all our students take the SAT, but likely a comparable group to the year before took the SAT, so roughly the same percentage, around 45% of our high schoolers took the SAT. And so the fact that we saw year-on-year gains in 1 year, so again, there were also limitations to what the SAT does and does not measure, so I wouldn't stake everything on that, but it's one of the early indicators that we do have, and that we have shared previously. So, yep.
Can I ask a clarifying question? In terms of the arbitrator's decision, my recollection, and tell me if this is right before I ask my question, my recollection is in terms of those students who are allowed to take 8 periods a day, that's our special ed students and our students who are academic priority students. So have we, or do we have the opportunity to go back to the arbitrator to talk to them about English language learners who might need more time, instructional time, or students maybe who are a credit or 2 behind and can't graduate on time? I mean, we're trying to get our graduation rate up, and could they take another? So how do we do that, or have we tried already? Or?
Yeah, I think that's it's not just a conversation with an arbitrator, but it's really a conversation with PAT and coming to some kind of an agreement around those students that would be able to go into an 8th period during the day. And so I know Brock and I have been involved in that conversation, and that'll continue.
And that's going to be a contractual change that would need to happen, or not necessarily?
Doesn't have to be. It just, the way the arbitrator ruled, we can always go back and meet with PAT and come to some kind of an agreement. So that's certainly an option on the table right now.
Okay, that's good to hear.
So it wasn't contractual language that put those limitations in place, so it wouldn't take a contractual change. But it would take an agreement to navigate around the arbitrator's decision in terms of an agreement with the Teachers Association. So they're sort of apples and oranges a little bit.
Okay.
Other questions?
I don't have a question. I just want to acknowledge that some of the 3 documents that we got this evening. I just want to call out just as much so that we can kind of own places where parents might be frustrated with us. That on the family advisory, the first bolded statement is students have the opportunity to take 8 classes. All students will have an opportunity to take 8 classes within courses that are available at each school. So I just want to own that we're not meeting that we communicated clearly with parents. So their frustration and disappointment is understandable.
Rightly so. Thank you.
I'd also like to appreciate just all the incredibly hard work that's gone into making this. I have a lot of questions around high school system design, so I'm looking forward to that discussion, but just in terms of this 6 of 8 piece and just the incredible challenges that our principals and all of you have been dealing with. So appreciate it, and we'll just keep working through this time as best we can.
Thank you.
So one of the things between this conversation and the conversation on high school redesign is I'm hoping that at some point we can together have a pretty deep discussion about how we're staffing high schools going forward, because clearly the high schools took a much more significant hit than others, and if it's working, fine, great. But if we're continuing to see some issues, I just want to make sure that we are able to have a really deep discussion about this in a budget context also, as we go prior to any decisions being made on the budget.
And that's part of what I'm referencing about district staffing team. That is the conversation that's taking place there with principals, is taking a look at impact of staffing models and staffing ratios heading into the next budget cycle.
Yeah, I know the high school principals appreciate that. careful look at how we're staffing our high schools right now. We're the exit point of the system. There's a lot of scrutiny on our high schools, and rightly so. And so I appreciate that.
And just to piggyback on that, well, we have so many of you sitting in our audience that, you know, we use terms like our principals are figuring out this puzzle or this mystery, and I just think of the amount of effort and energy that you go in just to get kids, the number of classes, the number of days. It is not easy, and so I just want to thank our principals and our community and our kids for working together to try to make a best of which is obviously not our ideal situation. And I thank you all for being here. I think you should all go home and go to sleep. Although I know that you're going to go home and do more work, but thank you.
I just had a question on the academic support part, and wondering if this has everything in it. And the thing that jumped out at me was Avid's only called out at Wilson, and there's another one, Cleveland. No, it's not called out at Madison. And so I would just ask that you guys go through and make sure that you're getting all of the academic support classes in here so that we can see where we're differentiating those resources, so that it's real clear to us and to the public what we're doing there.
Yes.
So, and I had some other questions around IB and AP and those kinds of things, but they're not, they can be for something else. Just, yeah.
That will be part of the high school system design.
Yeah.
As Sue Ann was referencing.
Exactly.
You're getting some deep detail on IB, AP, dual credit.
Right. And I'd also like to thank the principals. You guys are doing a great job. Thank you.
Again, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And we look forward to our discussion in November. I think in terms of the high school redesign, I think, you know, we all. November 19th. And, you know, again, thank the principals. I think, you know, people already stated. Certainly appreciate the creativity that has taken place in regards to trying to meet the demands of the students and their needs. And again, thank you again for being here. And we're done unless there are some announcements from my colleagues.
For me.
Okay, so this meeting will be adjourned momentarily, and the next meeting of the board will be held on October 15th at 6 p.m. here in the board auditorium. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.